And now we actually get to the fun part. We can actually use the data that we added to the portfolio manager and perform a biodiversity risk analysis. Now I'm going to start in the companies and groups tab and start the biodiversity analysis here, because again, the tools are built for a prioritization of a company. So we would start from here and analyze biodiversity on a company level, and then if necessary, we can go deeper onto the site level. Now, if I click here on Analyze Biodiversity, you will immediately see this map over here with all of the 97 sites that we just added to this company A, globally here with their associated risk levels for physical risk. The physical risk aspect is pre-selected, but you can select any kind of biodiversity risk aspect that we have within the tool here using this drop-down. So we, for example, have an analysis for physical risk and reputational risk. So you can also scroll down and get an analysis here of reputational risk and see the associated risk levels also for all of your different sites. You can also go down to a specific issue. So for example, soil condition, and see what sites might be associated with higher or lower risks on those issues. You can also expand here the show more settings button and play with the transparency of the layer, for example, to make the sites pop a little bit more. You can add additional information and choose different borders. Right now we have country borders enabled, but we can also do, for example, major river basins, etc. You can play with these settings here on the left. And what is also really important is that for each and every indicator and every category and every risk type, we have a detailed description of what you're seeing here, what the different risk levels mean. And on the bottom here as well, a link to our documentation that includes all of the different information on this layer, where it comes from, how we manipulated it, what it means to have high risk here, and a link to the data set where the data came from, the original data set. Then we move over here to this toggle. This is to enable the marine area risk layers. As you can see, the marine areas are just blue over here. So we disable them from or by default, because most of our users are going to be focusing on terrestrial areas. But if you have sites in the marine areas and you would like to see the marine area categorization, I warn you, it's a little visually overwhelming. If we go into, for example, physical risk here, then you can really see the risk layer for the entire globe. But if you only work with terrestrial areas, you can leave this toggle closed. There's a couple more ways to manipulate the map. Obviously, you can zoom in and out. You can search for a specific location and go directly there, or you can make the map a little bit bigger as well in order to move around in it. But those are pretty standard ways of navigating a map here for you to investigate your value chain. Now, this is the map part. We also have the details part here for our company B. And you are seeing here first 4 graphs with which you can start to assess what are the problems in terms of biodiversity for my company. You see 4 graphs here. Each and every one of them has a download button that gives you a PDF printout of that graph if you want to incorporate that in reports, for example, and also a little question mark that when pressed, you get a pop-up that gives you a little bit more information on what we're trying to show with this graph. Now let's go through those 4 different graphs that you have here. The top left one is really showing you how many sites you have in a specific geography, a land or seascape, or you can also choose sites by country. So, for example, if you're working with a company and they're trying to do a biodiversity risk strategy, but would like to focus on one of the countries that they're in, that they're investing in or that they're active in, with most of their sites at high risk. Here in this case, you would, for example, then create a biodiversity risk strategy for China or the United States, because you just have most of your high risk sites in those 2 countries. Now on the right side, we have number of sites by risk type. So that really shows you the distribution between those different risk types for your different sites. So as you can see here, you actually have 7 sites with very high physical risk, and still a high number of sites also in high risk, but you might want to focus on physical risk first here to address in your strategy. Another way of visualizing that is the bottom left graph here, where we are graphing reputational risk against physical risk. And this is really giving you a wonderful overview of all of the sites within your company and showcases which sites you might want to focus your strategy on. Likely not the ones on the bottom left, because they have very low risk levels in both reputational and physical risk, and more likely the ones on the bottom at the top right quadrant here that have both very high physical risk and very high reputational risk. Now you can break it down even further, because up until now we've only looked at risk types, the very aggregated risk types, physical and reputational risk, but you can also start breaking it down by risk category. And so you can see that your company is likely having issues mostly with risk category 3 here, which is all about natural hazards, heat wave diseases, and so you might want to start thinking about risk mitigation in that way. You also have a number of sites that have a very high risk on pressures on biodiversity. So they're actively increasing the pressures around them and impacting the biodiversity around them so that it might plummet in the future. You can also break it down even one more level here to the top 10 risk indicators that gives you an overview of the most prevalent issues within your company. If you only have, for example, money or time to tackle one issue, those would be good candidates to do so. You have extremely high media scrutiny, which kind of makes all of the other ones worse because it might get reported on. And you have also extreme problems with water scarcity. If you see something like that, it is a very good argument to, for example, also do a water risk analysis, because that will showcase a little bit more and give you more information on a deep dive for freshwater issues. And you can go down this list here and see what the most prevalent issues within your company are. Now, if you see this and you, for example, are wondering here for my agri-site animals 3, why is the risk so very, very high? You can also do a biodiversity risk assessment just on a site level. So if you go back to the portfolio manager here, you can go to sites, and we can now use those filters to search for agri-site 3. Let's just do agri-site. There we go, because it's animals 3. So if we find our site here, we can now do also an analysis of biodiversity risk just for this site. And as you can see, it's built very similarly, where you have here a site location. It shows you. It also shows you the scape risk scores for risk types, physical risk and reputational risk. We chose a site that has extremely high risk, so this is what is shown here, but maybe slightly higher physical risk scores. And also because we chose a site with extremely high risk levels, most of the scorings for the different risk categories here are very, very high. If you want to go even one level deeper to understand where or what your top 10 risk indicators are, you can click on here and see that, for example, for this specific location, it's again media scrutiny, water condition is a huge problem, and also an indicator that is indicating that there's, for example, deforestation going on as well, that the site might be associated with. So this is really a first way of introducing yourself to the potential issues that are on a site level. Please do keep in mind that for biodiversity, everything is based on global indicators. That means this is a really great first step for you to inform your further research for a specific site level. But those can give you an indication of where to focus your research on. Last but not least, and you can do this both for the company and for the site level, we have an export to Excel button on the top here, with which, and I'm actually going to go back here to our companies and show the output here. If you click on this export to Excel button, this will give you every single number that the biodiversity risk filter is creating for all of the sites within this company. That means if it's not enough for you to look at those 4 graphs and get an overview here, You can then go into this Excel and get a little bit more information on everything that is coming out of the biodiversity risk filter. We start again with a help tab that shows you, for example, color coding and gives you a little bit more information on what is included. But if you go into the escape risk results here, the left side is going to look very closely to the template that you uploaded your data in with the site names, company names, etc. But then on the right side, this is all of the information that the biodiversity risk filter now attached to those sites. So for each and every site, now you have the numbers for what is your physical risk, how does this physical risk come into place because you have issues with provisioning services, regulating and supporting services, etc. So all of the different numbers that you might need are included into this Excel. That is maybe a little overwhelming if you just want to have a big overview, but if you want to really do a deep dive into your company, into the different sites, this is what you can do and where you can find that information.